So, welcome to our next lecture on Mor Nevuchim, Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed. We are, again, for those that are joining the first time, I'm reading from the Shlomo Pinas edition. This edition, Guide for the Perplexed, we're in volume 2. We are, when I say page numbers, that's the volume I'm referring to. It's page 550 right now. That's 550. And we're about to read chapter 38 and part 3 of Mor Nevuchim. That's where we're up to, part of Guide for the Perplexed. So we are in the middle of discussing the reasons for the mitzvot, meaning why God told us in the Torah to keep the commandments as they are listed in the Torah. What's the reason for all of them? And Rambam first divided all the mitzvot into 14 categories. Then he described the reason for category number 1 and number 2, right? And in chapter 38, which we're about to begin today, in the middle of page 550, is the third group of the 14. And these groups generally correspond to the way he divided up the mitzvot, the commandments, as he wrote his magnum opus in Halacha and Jewish law, the Mishnah Torah. So chapter 38 is the third group. Now, the third group, I'm going to start reading. The commandments comprised in the third class are those that we have enumerated in laws concerning opinions. Now, here's a place where the change in the way we speak English between the time that Shlomo Pinas wrote this and today has necessitated a new translation by the Goodman-Lieberman edition. So it's really ethical laws. It's not laws about what opinions you're supposed to have about things. Nowadays, when you say opinion, it seems to be, what's my opinion on XYZ matter, and what's your... So it's talking about ethical laws, right? And the ethical laws are the laws as enumerated in Hilchot Deot, right? And which the Rambam which he says here in a minute, laws concerning opinions, which we translated Hilchot Deot, which literally does translate. Like if you wanted to do an accurate translation of the Rambam's word, Deot would mean opinions, but if you read it, it really means the laws of ethics. And I'm just going to read when Rambam begins Hilchot Deot, he lists 11 mitzvot that are in this category, 11 commandments, and just those are as follows. I'm going to read them to you so that you get an idea of what he's talking about. Because when you say laws concerning opinions, that it doesn't sound right to most modern ears. So number 1, lihidamot bidrachav, to act to be like God in the way we act. And the Rambam describes that means that just like God is described in the Torah as being compassionate, we are supposed to be compassionate, just like, and so on. Lihidabek biyodav, to attach ourselves to those that are with God. In other words, the mitzvah to seek appropriate company. Le'ehov et re'im, to love our fellow man. Le'ehov et gerim, the specific commandment to love converts and strangers, those who join our people from other peoples. Shelo lisno achim, not to hate others. Lehochiach, to give proper criticism, in the appropriate way, of course, and admonishment to others because you care about them. Shelo l'halbin panim, not to embarrass others. Shelo la'anot umlalim, not to oppress those who are downtrodden. It's easy to step on a person when he's lying in the mud. Figuratively speaking, it's easy to oppress people who are powerless, to take people that have no money, no power, no strength, and do whatever you want to them. And so there's a special mitzvah not to act in such a terrible way. Lo shelo la'aloch rachil, not to go around telling slanderous stories. Shelo linkom, not to take revenge. Shelo lintar, not to bear a grudge. Those are the 11 listed things that fall into this chapter 38. I listed them because now when we read what Rambam has to say, it'll make a lot of sense why this is a very short chapter. So Rambam says the utility of all of them, all of those mitzvot that I just listed to you, is clear and evident for all concerned moral qualities in virtue of which the association among people is in good condition. Right? The bottom line is that people get along together nicely, and you have a nice, good society when people obey these mitzvot. This is so manifest that I need not expatiate upon it. You don't need me to give you a speech about why these mitzvot are important to have a proper society. And if you do need me to say that, then I think you have a problem. So know that certain commandments also contain prescriptions that are intended to lead to the acquisition of a useful moral quality, even if they prescribe certain actions that are deemed to be merely decreed by Scripture and not to have a purpose, right? So some of the commandments in the Torah are also intended to lead to getting moral qualities, even if other people think they have no purpose to them. The Rambam doesn't list here what he's referring to specifically, but he's giving us a tip, right? That there are some mitzvot in the Torah that fit into this category, not among the ones that I listed, right? But he says we will explain them one by one in their proper places. We'll get to those. Rambam is saying those aren't in the list that I just read to you that are explicit that way, but I may explain to you later on. Rambam is hinting to us, or not hinting. He's telling us that some other mitzvot that others claim are just no purpose. They're just decrees, but I'm going to show you that they're actually meant to help us be better people. And this is specifically social mitzvot between person and person, like being a better person to get along in a society, like the Rambam said, in virtue of which the association among people is proper, right? So we will fine. As for those that we have enumerated in laws concerning opinions, those which I just listed, the ones that are in Hilchot Deot, they are explicitly stated to have as their purpose the acquisition of the noble moral qualities in question. All of those things are obvious, and the purpose of them is to gain the noble qualities which I just described. So that's chapter 38. One shouldn't think that because it's a short chapter that they're not important. It's a short chapter because it's so obviously important, and that's not the purpose of this book, to tell us why it's important to be a nice person, basically. Fine. So the next is chapter 39, which is a bit more lengthy, and this goes to the fourth class. Now, the fourth class is for the most part the laws concerning seeds, right? In other words, which Hilchot Zeraim, which is literally translates to seeds, but and the corresponding book in the Mishnah Torah where the Rambam writes the halachot, the laws, he refers to it as Hilchot Zeraim, laws concerning seeds. But seeds refers to everything that regards the agriculture and the agricultural cycle and the agricultural requirements that we have. Now, the thing is that remember that the Torah was given in a time when the commerce and the economy was primarily agricultural. I mean, even the Rambam's own time, most people, commerce was mostly agriculture. I mean, yeah, there was there were merchants, there was business, there was borrowing and lending and so on. But for the most part, most economic activity was agricultural. So you'll find as we go through this that a lot of this today is still relevant, but we just have to make a few adjustments. Instead of fields, we're talking about bank accounts. But regardless, so these laws, the book of seeds, right? So the commandments comprised in the fourth class are those included in the Sefer Zeraim, the book of seeds of our compilation, meaning in Mishnah Torah, with the exception of those dealing with the mingling of diverse species, right? Which he talked about back. Rambam associated that with idol worship, which we talked about last week, or maybe the week before, but it was in that chapter a couple chapters ago. Also, the law concerning estimations, and I have no idea what anathemas are, so someone might know that English word. But regardless, what it means is the erech and v'charamim, right? Well, actually, a cherem is translated as anathema, something that we push away from ourselves, and we say we're not going to have anything to do with it. So the laws of those laws, and also the commandments that we have enumerated in the laws concerning the lender and the borrower, and those we have enumerated in the laws concerning slaves, right? So all of these are included in the fourth category. He's going to discuss them more in detail. So hang in there, and we'll do it. Hopefully we'll get through this chapter tonight. And if you can, and why he's attaching all of these together, you'll understand as he analyzes each one, they're all going to fit a certain pattern, right? If you consider all these commandments one by one, what's that pattern? And he's going to give us the pattern, and then he's going to show us how this pattern plays out in all of these mitzvot, right? You will find that they are manifestly useful through instilling pity for the weak and the wretched, giving strength in various ways to the poor. So all of these are practices that we are supposed to do with our money, right? Or in this case, in the Torah's case, it was mostly with our produce, right? But the bottom line is with our goods, with our possessions, right? And help others and make others, right? In other words, the difference between this and the chapter before is the chapter before was more angled. They're very closely related, of course, but the chapter before was more about making us better people. This chapter is helping us make other people better, right? Helping us, uplift the others, right? But it's not a fine line. It's really, there's some of them are 51% self, 50, 40, 49. We'll see as we go through. So inciting us not to press hard upon those in straits and not to afflict the hearts of individuals who are in a weak position. So, and not to, hurt the downtrodden. So now let's go through them one by one. So as for the gifts to the poor, right? There's a mitzvah of giving charity to the poor, right? An important commandment. And there's also mitzvah of maser ani, right? A certain tithe that's supposed to be taken, a tenth of our produce in certain years to give to the poor, right? So the reason for these, for the offerings and the tithes, no, I'm sorry. As for the gifts to the poor, their meaning is manifest, right? Right. I just told you, right? We have to learn how to help others. Obviously, charity is helping others. You don't need the Rambam to explain that to us in detail. We should kind of figure that out. But what about the offerings and the tithes that we give to the priests and the Levites? The Torah commands us to give to the priestly caste. And now this is it's a little different, but it's going to touch on a pattern that we're going to see in the Rambam that's very clear. The Rambam here is being very focused on the simple biblical meaning of the mitzvot, right? In other words, the ideal biblical meaning. And he's not addressing the significant amount of rabbinic interpretation and rabbinic laws and rabbinic decrees and rabbinic understandings that happen afterwards. Not to say that the Rambam ignored all that. He didn't at all. All that's incorporated in the Mishnah Torah when he enumerates the rules. But the basic idea of Maser, which is tithes to Levites, and the basic idea of Truma and Challah and the other gifts we give to the Kohanim, to the priests, follows the following reasoning. You know the reason for this, so that this tribe as a whole should be devoted exclusively to the divine service and to knowing the Torah, and should not be engaged in tilling and harvesting, but should be concerned exclusively with God. As it says, thou shalt teach Yaakov thine judgments and Israel thy Torah. That's the ideal, is that the Kohanim and the Leviim are supposed to play that role. Now, throughout history, has every Kohen been a teacher of Torah and been a saint? Not quite, right? Many have, but unfortunately, there have been many corrupt Kohanim as well, and many in between, Kohanim that just didn't buy that didn't like the job, and they went to work as a plumber or whatever. It could anything, So, and the same thing with the Levites. But the ideal situation is such, and the Torah set it up in such a way that that is the job of that tribe. You will find the text of the Torah speaks in several passages of the Levites and the stranger and the orphan and the widow. For it considers the Levi as one of the poor in view of the fact that he has no property. The Levi, at least in principle, that tribe didn't receive an inheritance of land in the land of Israel like the other tribes did. And the Levi's job it was, they had places to live, cities to live in, but ultimately they had no a significant amount of land to make to grow crops and engage in business. So they had to be supported. Right. As for this, okay, so therefore it's our job to help them out because they're providing a needed function in society and a very important function in society, but they don't have the means to support themselves. They need to be supported by others. So as for the second type, so again, if it's the same pattern, teaching us how to help others and make others' lives better. And what about the second tithe? So the second tithe is the tithe that at certain years during the sabbatical cycle, the Shemitah cycle, we're supposed to take one tithe and give it to the Levi, and the second tithe, the second tenth, we're supposed to put in a suitcase and take with us to Jerusalem. When we go for the holidays to celebrate, we bring that food there and we celebrate with eating that food in Jerusalem, right? Or if it's too much, and you can't take 12, they didn't have you couldn't drive an 18-wheeler truck full of all your produce to Jerusalem, so you would redeem it on money, take the money to Jerusalem, and spend that money in the Jerusalem markets on food specifically. So that's the second tithe. So that it was commanded that it should be spent exclusively on food in Jerusalem. Why? For this leads of necessity to giving some of it in alms, right? If you come with a giant a truckload, or if you come with $10,000 and you got to spend it here, and this is where all the people are gathered. There's lots of poor people, people that don't have property, people that didn't have a good year in their farms, and they're all there celebrating the holiday. And you have all this food, and you can't eat it all yourself. You're going to share it with everyone there, right? So for it can only be as employed on because you're only allowed, you can't use it and say, oh, I'm going to use it, and oh, the Jerusalem markets are great, I'm going to go buy myself a big nice diamond and a couple of gold coins and this nice piece of art, and then pack it up on my wagon and take it home with me and hang it up in my living room or wear it as jewelry. It doesn't work the way. You're not allowed to use it for that reason. You have to use it on food. So therefore, it's going to necessarily, it was easy for a man to have others have it little by little. What are you going to do when you have all this food and money that you have to spend on food? You're going to spend it for other people. It reminds me, there was this movie that I saw where a guy had $1 million and he had to spend it in a day. I think it was like 30 years ago. But one of the things he does is just go to a restaurant and say, all right, the bill's on me, and just give everybody food. And everybody has a big party and orders good food. Thus, it necessarily brought about a gathering in one place, so that brotherhood and love among the people were greatly strengthened. Everyone sat and ate together and enjoyed themselves together for the holiday. You can imagine why that mitzvah has a purpose. As for the fourth year fruit of planting, what about the law that it's also included in the laws of Zeraim, right, of seeds, right, of agriculture, and that is that for the first 3 years of a tree's growth, right, we learned in the couple chapters ago that Rambam said we're not allowed to take part in it because of its smacked of idolatrous practices, and God wants us to stay away from idolatrous practices. Take that fruit and get rid of it. So what about the fourth year? We're supposed to take it to Jerusalem. So even though, because of its connection with the prescriptions concerning the first products, remember Rambam told us that in the first products, the idolaters used to bring those products to to their idol or whatever as part of their worship. So God said, no, you can't use it at all, to stay away from that stuff. But then he says the fourth year, take it to Jerusalem. So it almost sounds like the same practice. So even though that it might smack a little of idolatry, as we said, right, it falls into the same class as the prescriptions concerning the offering, the cake of dough, the first fruits, and the first of the fleece. The truth is, though, that it goes along with this, because the fourth year is the first year that we're permitted to eat the fruits from our trees, right? So therefore, it goes in the same category as all the first products that we bring to God, like we bring the first fleece of the sheep, right? The Reishis Hagez, or the challah, which is the first piece of dough, or all these things, right? So for all first produces have been assigned to God, so that the moral quality of generosity be strengthened, and the appetite for eating and for acquisition be weakened. To take us away, just imagine, you give somebody a big bowl of fruit, right? And instead of just immediately engorging, grabbing the nice juice fruit and taking a big bite, right? You say, no, first we have to give, then we can enjoy, right? And that tells you these two major lessons. The Rambam says, number one, it teaches you to be generous. It's not all for you, and you don't just give leftovers, but you first give to someone else, and also the appetite for eating, right? It teaches us to hold off. You're hungry, I understand, you'll eat, but take a chill pill for a minute, relax, give something to God, and then you'll get food. and acquisition be weakened, and the desire to get more and more things. Also, it teaches you this lesson of generosity. This reminds me of a family story that I want to share, if you don't mind. Um, and it goes back to my great grandfather, who was he was the Mudgitzer Rebbe. He was the grand rabbi of the Hasidim of Mudgitz, right? And he was a Hasidic Rebbe in Poland, and he lived in a town prior to World War II called Otvatsk, which was a small town not far from Warsaw. And when and you may be aware that among certain groups of Hasidim, and including the Hasidim of Mudgitz, they had the custom of giving what's called in Yiddish, it's called shirayim, right? Or it's kind of Hebrew shirayim, meaning leftovers, right? Or giving the extras, right? But what really happens by the Rebbe's Tish, it's a little different than this. Instead of giving the first part, the Rebbe would be served, say, a big bowl of fruit or a big bunch of slices of kugel. The Rebbe would take a little bit, and then he would give out the rest from his plate. That was the way it was done. What's the reason for this custom? You'll understand a reason in a moment, whether or not it's the reason why everyone has this custom. But it's a custom that's frequently mocked by non-Hasidic Jews because it looks kind of silly. Why don't you just give everybody a plate? Like, it just looks kind of silly. So anyway, the year is 1939, and the Nazis invade Poland. And my great grandfather, along with my grandfather and one of his brothers and a nephew of my, of my great grandfather, so three young men, about teenagers all. The radio warned that the Nazis are invading, especially young men should run. He wrote a letter then to my great uncle, who was living in what was then British Mandate Palestine, saying we ran, with the intention, once we get to our destination, we'd get the women, because we knew no one's going to harm the women and children. This is before they knew that everyone that stayed behind was going to be killed, but by the Nazis. But regardless, so they started running. So on the day of the invasion, and they at first they managed to secure visas to Curacao, the island in the off the coast of northern South America, and they never intended to actually go there. They just managed to get visas to there to have a destination, and they the only place to run, they couldn't run to Russia because that was under Stalin. They couldn't run westward. So Lithuania was at the time. Lithuania was neutral, right? In the beginning of the war, it was neutral. And the pact between Hitler and Stalin left the Vilna, the capital of Lithuania, as a neutral city. So they ran to Vilna, or Vilnius. And when they ran to Vilna, that is the capital of opposition to Hasidut, to Hasidism, right? So when he arrives there, here we have this Hasidic rabbi arriving in Vilna. Well, actually, to be honest, on their way to Vilna, it was another town in Lithuania where they stopped called Kovna, right? I'm not sure what that's called in English, but in Yiddish it's called Kovna. And it was also a Lithuanian town. They arrived there, and the town says, "Oh, this Hasidic Rebbe from Poland is here." So people came to his Friday night meal, his tish, to see what the Hasidic Rebbe is about. And he started giving out the shirayim, so he gives out the food from his plate, and everyone starts snickering and giggling, laughing, whatever. It's like, what's this weird custom? So he says out loud to everybody, he makes an announcement, and he says something that got everyone's attention pretty fast. He said, if Hitler knew the secret of shirayim, the secret of this custom, then I wouldn't be here today. So everyone's quiet for a minute. Like, what is he talking about? So he says, the secret of shirayim is I take what I need for myself, and the rest I give to everyone else, right? It's not, I don't keep it all for me. I take a little bit, this is what I need, and everything else I share, right? If Hitler understood, all he would need is Germany. He has it for himself. and he wouldn't need to invade Poland, and he wouldn't need to, go around conquering other countries. So I wouldn't be here. I'd be back home where I belong. Anyway, that just reminded me. I thought I would share that story here, and
Okay.
and so that was at least my great grandfather's understanding of that Hasidic custom,
Okay.
and it's similar to what the Rambam is saying here. When we have all this food, first you give, and then you can indulge, right? It's a little different, I know, but similar enough in idea that I think it's a fair lesson. So the priests receiving the shoulder. I'm in the second to last paragraph on 551 now. For jaws are primarily part of the body of the animal, and the shoulder is the right shoulder and is also the first part that is branched off from the body, and the stomach is the first of all the intestines. He's explaining that the certain parts of the body that we give to the Kohen, to the priest, also represents first, like the beginnings of things. So it's the same idea. So as for and what about the reading that we say when we bring the first fruits, right? It's in Devarim Perek Chavav. It's worthwhile reading for those. Maybe I can. Let me pull it up here. Um, uh, Devarim 26, right?
Right. 26, 3-10.
Okay, I'm almost there. Okay, so it's worth reading. Uvas al Kohen, you'll come to the priest and you'll tell him, Higadati Hayom, I'm speaking now before God because I have come to this land that God has promised our forefathers to give us, right? And then the Kohen takes the basket, and then you say as follows: Arami Oved Avi, right? An Aramean, right? Well, there's different ways to translate this, but the best translation I think is my forefather was a lost wandering Aramean, right? That's all he was. He was wandering the world. By Ered Mitzrayim, eventually he went to Egypt and he lived there for a while and he grew into a nation. But then they dealt harshly with us, the Egyptians, and they oppressed us and they made us forced labor. And we cried out to God, and God listened to our calls. And He saw how impoverished we were. He saw how hard we were working. He saw how much we were being oppressed, and He took us out of Egypt. This should be famous to those that are going to be celebrating the Passover, the Pesach Seder soon. We read these words. He took us out of Egypt with the strong hand and an outstretched arm, and so on. And He brought us to this place, and He gave us this good land. And therefore, now in verse 10, it says, "I am bringing." Because of all this, I am now bringing the first of the fruits of my land that God has given me, and I'm placing it before God, and I'm prostrating myself before God. It's a beautiful little prayer. It's which is the reason why it's included in the Haggadah, and it's short and sweet and to the point, but it's really makes a lot of important points. And that's what the Rambam is referring to here. It is conducive to the moral quality of humility. What do you do when you get that first big paycheck, right? Do you say, wow, I'm the greatest guy in the world. I must be the smartest guy in the world. I must be the best, most skilled guy in the world. I'm so happy that they gave me this job. I'm so happy they gave me, you make your first business deal and they cut you a big check, or do you say, I have a humble past. I worked really hard. I suffered a lot, and God granted me with this huge favor, and out of gratitude to God, I bring this before Him, and I give it to others. So it contains an acknowledgement. I'm about to turn to the page to 552 of God's beneficence and bountifulness, so that man should know that it is a part of the divine worship that man should remember states of distress at a time when he prospers. The key thing is that when things are going good, don't forget that once upon a time things were not so good. Don't think you're so great. It might be going well for you now. Tomorrow or yesterday it wasn't that great. And stay humble. Because the wheel goes round and round. This purpose is frequently affirmed in the Torah, and thou shalt remember that thou wast a servant, and so on. You always remember that you were once that person who was a migrant and a foreigner in a foreign land. That was once you. Now you think you're the big macher, And that guy is the one who barely speaks the language, and it's a hard time, and he just can't find a job. His training doesn't fit the land where he is in now, and he's struggling. And that was once you. Or if it wasn't you, it was your father or his father, or and so on. So that's purpose. So for there was a fear of the moral qualities that are generally acquired by all those who are brought up in prosperity, because the Torah was afraid that those that are raised in prosperity, those that are raised in wealth and raised where they have everything and everything is handed to them, they unfortunately often gain these qualities. They become this kind of person: conceit, which is gava, false pride; vanity, being interested in things that are worthless and useless and praising things that are nonsense; and neglect of the correct. And he says opinions here. Remember that we have to retranslate that. It's not opinions, it's ethics, it's ethical behavior and ethical qualities, right? Lest when you have eaten and are satisfied in houses and so on, and vayishman Yeshurun vayivat, Yeshurun, the people of Israel, they get fat, right? And that's when they kick back. That's when they start acting bad, when they start getting arrogant. It is because of this apprehension, because the Torah understood this, and because God understood that this is often a natural result of being wealthy and being successful, is becoming arrogant, that he said, right, that the commandment has been given to carry out a reading every year before him and in the presence of his indwelling, and the occasion of the offering of the first fruits. That the first money that you make for the year, right? That's what it was in those days, right? Right? The first fruits you harvest from your field, you don't sell them, you don't eat them, but you bring them to God and you read this prayer that reminds you that you're not so great. Once upon a time, your ancestor was also a wandering Aramean that had no place to go and had no home and didn't speak the language, right? You also know already that the Torah insists upon the plagues which befell the Egyptians being always remembered. Remember how the plagues, that they, the day you left Egypt, and that thou mayest tell in the ears of thy son, and so on. And this was fittingly arranged. The reason why all of this is together, it's appropriate that we're reading this right before Pesach now. For these are the stories that show the truth of prophecy and reward and punishment. These stories teach us, right, that ultimately there is reward and punishment, there is justice. Now, in the case of every commandment leading to a mention of some miracle or to perpetuation of this belief, right, the utility of the commandment is obvious, right? That when there's a mitzvah, right, that teaches us this idea, then the purpose of that mitzvah is obvious. So now he continues a little more. I was hoping I'd finish this chapter, but I don't know. Anyway, it states explicitly with reference to the redemption of the human firstborn and the animal firstborn. And it can't, so now he's going to give examples of mitzvot that specifically reference Yetziat Mitzrayim, reference the Exodus from Egypt, and also help teach us the lessons that that he mentioned before. So what about so he mentions here the mitzvah of the firstborn. So we know there's a mitzvah of a firstborn of your animals, right? The mitzvah is to give the firstborn to a Kohen, right? To a priest, right? And remember who he said, the priest, at least the ideal of a priest, represents the one who's devoting his life to serving God, and therefore this is how you're supporting him. And also of a donkey, and he's going to explain why those species in a minute. Right? The reason why this is particular to these animals, oxen, small cattle, and asses, is most manifest. For these are domestic animals that are raised and are to be found in most places. Remember, the Rambam, and this is, we've seen this repeatedly, understands that these mitzvot were given within a certain context in a certain society within which certain things were true. That they may not be true today. Most of us don't own cattle or donkeys, right? But in those days, most people did, right? And there may have been other places in the world where most people had yaks, and other places in the world where most people had llamas. But in a place where it was given, and more particularly in Syria. Remember, Syria in the Rambam's time refers to the entire region that encompasses the modern countries today of Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Jordan, for the most part. That whole region was the Syria region in those days. So in that whole area, and even more particularly among the people of Israel, right? all of us being shepherds from fathers to grandfathers, say servants of shepherds, and so on. So those are animals that they always had, that most people within that context, in that place, in this particular ethnicity to whom which the Torah was given. But horses and camels are in most places not to be found in the possession of shepherds, nor are they found in all places. Horses were things that were more likely to be owned by wealthy people, armies, things like that. But they weren't the kind of animal that were practical use for the average farmer. And the same thing with camels, were more likely to be found among people who traveled long distances, whatever, merchants. But the average person didn't have camels. Consider the raid against Midian. You will not find any animals other than oxen, small cattle, and donkeys, which is a very interesting observation, right? For the species of asses was necessary to all men, especially to those engaged in agricultural work, right? And I have oxen and asses, but camels and horses are in most cases found only in the possession of only a few men and only in some places. So therefore, those were particularly stated in the mitzvah, right, that the firstborn should be given to God for reasons which we've already said, because giving the first of anything teaches you generosity, it teaches you humility, right? And like he stated before, which directly is related to the understanding that we once were slaves, that we once suffered, that we shouldn't feel so great about ourselves because we were once in that position, and therefore when we see someone else in that position, we should treat them properly. As for the prescription concerning the breaking of the neck of the firstling of an ass, what about this? It's a very unusual and difficult to wrap our heads around. The fact that it says that the donkey, it says that either you redeem it or you break its neck and kill it, right? So this is due to its leading necessarily to the firstlings being redeemed. The reason why it said that was not because the Torah wants you to actually kill the donkey. The Torah wants you to redeem the donkey. It says if you don't, you're not going to get any use out of it, right? So therefore, as Chazal have said, that first the commandment that it redeemed is prior to the commandments that be broken. That your first obligation is to redeem it, not to kill it, right? The killing is really just a threat to make you give it, to make you redeem it, right? So fine. So now we understand the reason for all of those mitzvot that have to do with giving the firsts, right? Okay, so what about the commandments with regard to all the commandments that I'm at the top of 553 now, that we have enumerated in laws concerning the sabbatical year in Shemitah and Yovel, the laws of the sabbatical year and Yovel. Some of them are meant to lead to pity and help for all men, as the text has it, that the poor of thy people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field shall eat, and so on, and are meant to make the earth more fertile and stronger through letting it lie fallow. Here we have an interesting thing, because we haven't had a lot of this before in the Rambam. But here the Rambam is stating that the mitzvah has a very practical, scientifically valid purpose. By allowing the land to lay fallow for a year, right, you allow it to regenerate, you allow the nutrients to collect so that it becomes more productive. And something that all farmers know, that if you farm the land year, after a while, the land loses a lot of its nutrients and it becomes less and less productive. That leads to a lot of questions, are the mitzvahs, but for the Rambam, that's not difficult, because every mitzvah makes scientific sense, right? Whether it's sociological science or psychological science, right? But they all make literal sense, right? They're logical, they're reasonable. So a mitzvah that makes the land more productive makes sense, and it fits as a good reason. But it also, so that's some of them. But some of the mitzvot, others are meant to lead to benevolence towards slaves and poor people. So here I refer, Rambam says, to remission of debts and freeing of slaves. The fact that at every seventh year, all debts are forgiven, right? And all slaves, at least, certain types of slaves are freed, right? So it's being benevolent towards those that are in trouble, or those that owe a lot of money. Right? Others consider what is useful from a permanent point of view in providing for a living, through turning the whole land into an inalienable possession that cannot be sold in absolute fashion. That's the mitzvah, that every 50 years, all lands go back to their original families that owned them, and you never sell land forever, right? So basically, this means that The land shall not be held in perpetuity, right? Lo timacher litzmitut is how the Torah says it, right? Consequently, a man's property remains, as far as the landed property itself is concerned, reserved for him and his children, and he can only exploit its produce. He can sell it to someone so that someone else might get a chance to use it and profit from it, but it never actually becomes the other person's. It always remains on its most basic level the property of the original owner. Thus, we have given reasons for everything that is included in the book of seeds, figuring in our compilation, with the exception of the interbreeding of beasts, the reason for which will be explained later on. Right? So everything that I included in my book, Sefer Zeraim, and Mishnah Torah, I've just went through and I've explained the reasons. Now, interestingly, I'm just going to point out an observation, and I'm going to make this observation several times as we go through this. Right? What the Rambam is giving here is for the fundamental reasoning for the mitzvah as it is presented in the Torah, right? So when you read the verse, right, you can understand what the purpose of the giving of this mitzvah is. The Rambam does not go into explaining any of the details, any of the rabbinic laws, or any of the rabbinic understandings and derivations and all the Talmudic literature that comes after the verse, right? That and lists all kinds of either permissions or prohibitions and so on. None of that is in here, and it's designed that way. The Rambam is deliberately doing that. He's telling you in the context of the verse, when you read it, this is what the basic reason for the mitzvah in a broad sense. And you'll understand why I'm emphasizing that. I mean, it's important that you can understand that already, but as we go through it, it'll become more and more important to understand that the Rambam is doing that. But then remember, in the beginning of this chapter, there are a few other things that fall into the category of this fourth category that this chapter is about, right? That are not included in Sefer Zeraim, and he's about in the rules of Book of Seeds, and he's about to explain those. All the commandments that we have enumerated in laws concerning estimations and anathemas. So that would be erchen and charamim, right? So erchen is when you promise a certain person's value to the temple, or a cherem is when you set something aside for a priestly purpose, like you say, this field is a cherem for the Kohanim. It's something that I'm not going to have benefit from. Only the priests can have benefit from. So, and there's all kinds of rules. Likewise, deal with charitable donations. The idea of this is these are donations to the temple, right? Some of these go to the priests, others for repairing the temple. Through all this, likewise, the moral quality of generosity is acquired, and the result achieved that man holds property in slight esteem where God is concerned and is not miserly. It makes you you don't keep it all for yourself, but some of it you give to the temple. Give it to God. For most of the evils that arise among people in the cities are due only to a furious desire for possessions and for increasing them and to the passion of acquisition. Most evil in this world arises from people's desire for more wealth, for more possession. And when society honors people's search for wealth, and that's what the goals are, then you end up with most of the evils that we unfortunately end up with, because unfortunately we live in such a society today, and hopefully, who knows, God help us and save us one of these days. Similarly, if you consider one by one all the commandments that we have enumerated in the laws considering the lender and the borrower, right, you will find that all are imbued with benevolence, pity, and kindness. They forbid depriving anyone of utility necessary for his nourishment. I mean, no man shall take the other uppermost unto pledge. If someone owes you money, it doesn't give you the right to take everything that they have. You can only take what they can afford to give you. If they can't, if you're not allowed to take from them what they need to live. You can't take their house away. You can't take their they need to have at least enough clothing to wear at home and to work and to sleep. You have to leave them a pillow. You have to make sure they have heat in their house. Right, the fact that they owe you money, and these are things in that the Torah commands. The things that a person needs to live, no matter how much they owe you money, you're still not allowed to take it from them. They have to be able to live, and that's a rule, and the reasoning for that it certainly fits into this category and certainly understandable. Similarly, all the commandments that we have enumerated in the laws concerning slaves. So this next one is really good, but I'm like, Okay, let's just do it. Okay, all imbued with pity and benevolence for the weak. Now here you have to understand that Rambam lived in a time when slavery was still an accepted practice worldwide, right? People had slaves in Rambam's time, right? And unfortunately, they did until quite recently, right? And even today in some parts of the world, maybe they call it something else, but for all effects and purposes, it still exists. So the idea of owning a slave, the idea that we have today that there shouldn't be slavery at all, would probably fit under what Rambam described, similar to how he described the carbonot, the sacrifices, right? In order to get us to the point, right, where we have true pity on other human beings and don't have slavery at all, we needed first to get through the level where slaves deserve some level of dignity and some level of compassion and so on and so forth. So thus great pity is manifested in the prescription according to which a Canaanite slave is set free if he has been deprived of a limb. So if you strike your Canaanite slave in such a way that he or she loses a limb, right, that person goes free. So that slavery should not be conjoined in his case with mutilation. So not only is he a slave, but he's, missing a limb, he's mutilated. This applies even if it has only been a tooth, right? I just turned to page 554. And all the more in the case of other parts of his body. It is also not permitted to strike him except with a whip or a stick or similar things, as I described in Mishnah Torah, and you can look at it there. And even so, if you strike him so hard and he dies, then you get the death penalty just like anyone else, right? He's a human being or she's a human being, and there's no exemption from the death penalty if just because the person was your slave. So here we have the those laws of compassion upon your slaves. The commandment given in his saying at the second paragraph now on 554 is thou shalt not deliver unto his master a slave. Now, I need to do this next week because there's in these next two paragraphs, even though or next time, because even though they're short and I could easily read through them in the next 11 minutes, but I have a lot I want to say about them. So I think we should stop here and finish this chapter and finish this next time we study together. So I'm going to open the floor for questions, but first I want to say, that we're going to take the next 2 weeks off for Pesach. So I won't be giving lecture next Wednesday or the Wednesday after. And then with God's help, I guess, let me see, what date would that be? It would be, I guess, the 23rd. Wednesday the 23rd is when we'll start up again. But right now, there's these next two paragraphs. You'll see what I mean. I'll leave you a little, suspense. There's a lot of good stuff in them. So it wouldn't be fair to rush through them.
Sure.
All right. So now we can open the door to questions, comments. Anybody?
Yeah. So
Go ahead. Yes.
did the Levites have any special responsibilities during wartime?
It's an interesting question. Very interesting question. So it's not delineated that much in the Torah, but let me, if you bear with me for 2 seconds, give me a minute. And I'll read you something, okay? I just have to pull it up, so give me a minute. So So in the book of Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim Bet, that's the second book of Chronicles, chapter 20. Are you ready? Look at it. When you have a chance, look at it, and it describes a battle when King Jehoshaphat, who was one of the Judean kings, I think he was either the 6th or the 7th in line after David. Jehoshaphat is considered one of the righteous kings of Judah, and he was under attack, right, by an alliance of Ammonites, Moabites, and Edomites. Okay, so the situation was dire, And Yoshaphat first responds by calling all the people to Jerusalem, to the temple, to pray. And the prayer that he calls out and he says to the, it's, you can read it. It's a very passionate prayer before God, and all the people are crying and praying and everything to be saved from this coming onslaught. The men, women, children, even the young children, everyone was there at the temple praying. But then it says that then a prophet named Yachaziel, who was a Levite, right, prophecies that will go out to greet them in battle, but don't worry, God will save us. God will battle for us. But then it specifically says, as they went out to battle, it says as follows: Vayakumu Halaviim, the Levites got up, those from the children of Kahat family of Levites and the Korach family of Levites, L'halel Adonai, to sing praises to God, Elohei Yisrael, Lord of Israel, B'kol Gadol, in a loud voice, L'mala, very loud, and so that everyone was inspired by their praying. And then that was still in the temple, but then when they actually went out to battle, right? It says again, the Levites went out to battle with everyone. And when they began, when they were approaching the enemy, they started singing and praising God, right? In order to lift people's morale and spirits, as they approached the battle. So if this battle description is to be taken as how the Judeans are supposed to go to war, then the Levites would have been, I guess, comparable to a modern day chaplaincy, right? Where their job is to spiritually encourage the soldiers, and pray with them and even sing with them, in order to inspire them to fight for a good cause. In the end, a miracle happened, and the Edomites got into a fight with the Moab, and they all started. They had a civil. This alliance of enemies started fighting amongst themselves. So the Jews basically just sat there and watched them destroy themselves. But that's the story in Chronicles. It's a chapter 19 or 20. What did I say? Chapter 20 of the second book, Chronicles. So I mean, I don't know if that is exactly how they always went to war, but that would be a biblical description of what the Levites' role is in war. Does that work? But I can't hear you what you said. I don't know if you're
yes, I was just thinking if there's any relevance or parallel with the Haredi, if there's any.
Well,
you see what I'm saying?
I guess I have no qualms about saying that there is no thing like that. I mean, because the not participating in battle there was never a group of Jews that didn't take on, that didn't participate. If the Haredi if they would all be chaplains and actually chaplains go to war, by the way, when the missiles blow up, they don't not blow up chaplains, when the enemies shoot, they shoot everyone in uniform, even if it has a little Star of David or whatever your symbol is, so not going to war and not participating, that's not precedented in Jewish history. There's no excuse for what they're doing. None. That's zero. And I have no qualms about saying it in public, online. If people want to get mad at me, that's fine. But I myself am a veteran of the United States Army, and I have two boys that are veterans of the IDF and currently in the fight. And I have no qualms about saying that if you're not gonna roll up your sleeves and join, then keep your mouth shut and don't expect anything.
So to extend that question, the Levites and the Kohanim did not actually work in terms of earning money. They did other things. And is that any parallel in how yeshivas and people that just study and don't work and receive money from donors? Is there any parallel?
No, because remember, it was when the Rambam talked about the priests, their job was to teach. They had jobs. Their job was to teach Torah. Remember the verse that the Rambam brought? They shall teach Jacob thine judgments and Israel thy Torah, right?
Right.
Right?
Okay.
They weren't unemployed. They just
No.
had a job that required payment from the public as opposed to earning money on the market like everyone else.
So I'm asking if there's a parallel to that with
No, there is none. There's no parallel.
Hebrew study.
And I say that without any problems either. There's no parallel. There's no precedent in Jewish history for that kind of nonsense. It's never happened before, and it's only in the last couple decades, and it's complete nonsense. There's no. I mean,
Where did it come from? Is what I'm trying to figure out.
I
The
can give you a
rationale that these
history
people have.
lecture on modern ultra-Orthodox Judaism, but that's not the place and time, and there's probably much better experts out there than I am. But one thing I can tell you is that as a phenomenon in Jewish history, I'm not saying that there never was in history a scholar who was supported by others in specific arrangements. There were scholars who, small groups who occasionally there might have been people of more means that said, this guy should study or whatever because he's shows some promise. But as a class of people and in a widespread way where people just got paid to study, there's never been such a thing in history, never. And the concept of the Levite and the Kohen, I mean, the Rambam explicitly said they had a job, right? Their purpose was to teach, right? Their purpose was to perform the service in the temple on our behalf. They had jobs for us, right? They did things. They led us, and in the case of the Levites, they led us in song and inspiration and prayer, and so on. So no, there's no precedence for that, and the people that walk around claiming that that's what the Torah says they're just simply wrong, And in my opinion, I made my opinion clear. I don't have to say it again.
Yeah. Okay, I understand.
All right. Yeah, I mean, and you can read through the entire Tanakh and you can read through the entire Talmud, and I promise you, you won't find not a shred of evidence for that lifestyle. Not a single shred. It's all made up. Okay? All right. Well, any other comments this evening?
Just thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Have a wonderful evening and have a wonderful Pesach to everyone. And 2 weeks, with God's help, we'll be back here again, and we'll finish chapter 39, and I promise you the next two are pretty cool stuff. So it'll be fun. I mean, the rest of the book is, of course, but yeah. All right.
Thank you, Saul.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
great.